The sovereign petition, a philosophical and ethical defense of the prayer for universal renewal. The sovereign petition, a philosophical and ethical defense of the prayer for universal renewal. 1. The nature of the sovereign petition. The sovereign petition represents a seismic shift in the landscape of spiritual phenomenology, moving away from the restorative supplications of antiquity toward an eschatological demand for ontological restructuring. Historically, the act of prayer has functioned primarily as a mechanism for localized mitigation, a desperate plea for the intervention of grace within the boundaries of a broken system. Whether seeking the cessation of a specific illness or the resolution of a communal conflict, traditional prayer accepts the foundational architecture of the universe as a given, seeking only to patch its most egregious tears. The sovereign petition, however, identifies the very fabric of our current reality as inherently entropic and flawed. It is a radical philosophical stance that refuses to negotiate with a reality defined by suffering. Instead, it strategically targets the root of the problem, the ontological framework of the cosmos itself. As defined within the source context, the parameters of this petition are absolute, binary, and totalizing. It is a formal request for the divine to initiate the terminal phase of the current flawed universe and to simultaneously manifest a new existence. This new reality is not merely an improvement on the old but a complete departure from it, characterized by an immutable state of eternal love, bliss, and goodness. Crucially, the scope of this request is not restricted by temporal or spatial boundaries. It encompasses every being who ever was, are, and will be. This is a demand for a systemic reset of the biological, physical, and spiritual laws that govern consciousness, seeking a reality where pain is not merely mitigated, but ontologically impossible. This shift in focus represents a universalized ethical demand of the highest order. By moving beyond the microethics of personal relief, the petitioner assumes the role of a cosmic advocate. The petitioner ceases to be a passive recipient of a divine decree and instead becomes an active stakeholder in the teleological trajectory of existence. This transition redefines the petitioner's role from a humble observer of universal decay to a visionary catalyst for universal redemption. To offer the sovereign petition is to assert that the current state of affairs is unacceptable and that the human will, in alignment with the highest potential of the good, demands a constitutional change in the laws of being. It is an act of spiritual sovereignty that bridges the gap between the agony of the present and the potentiality of an eternal future. 2. The intellectual supremacy of the universal request. In any rigorous system of spiritual logic, intelligence must be measured by the optimization of outcomes relative to the expenditure of intentionality. If prayer is understood as a formal communication of intent directed toward an omnipotent agency, then the most intelligent prayer is that which secures the absolute maximum utility for the totality of sentient existence through a single, comprehensive request. The sovereign petition stands as the definitive expression of this ultimate optimization algorithm. It bypasses the suboptimal expenditure of spiritual capital on incremental improvements, which are, by their very nature, temporary and localized. Instead, it addresses the foundational, design flaw of a closed entropic system where suffering is an inevitable byproduct of the laws of physics and biology. To understand the intelligence of this petition, one must analyze it through the lens of ontological efficiency. Traditional, incremental prayers operate on a principle of resource allocation that is logically bankrupt, asking for a single healing in a world defined by mortality, or peace in a world defined by scarcity. These are whack-a-mole strategies that fail to account for the systemic nature of pain. The sovereign petition, by contrast, targets the root cause. By asking for the dissolution of the current flawed universe, the petitioner applies a total systemic solution to a total systemic problem. It is the logical equivalent of discarding a corrupted operating system in favor of an optimized one, rather than attempting to patch infinite individual bugs. To ask for anything less than a universal reset is to engage in a logical fallacy, the belief that a perfected experience can be sustained within a fundamentally imperfect framework. Furthermore, the intelligence of the prayer is reflected in its sophisticated grasp of total existence. By including every being across the entire horizon of time, past, present, and future, the petitioner demonstrates a high-order grasp of universalist soteriology. A narrow, localized perspective would focus only on the living, but the sovereign petition recognizes that true bliss is diminished if it remains insulated from the historical suffering of the billions who preceded us. A perfected universe that ignores the agony of the past is not a perfected universe, it is merely a gated community in time. The sovereign petition demands a perfected history, reflecting a totalizing vision that is both mathematically sound and philosophically comprehensive. This intellectual optimization is matched only by the moral depth of the petitioner's intent. 3. The zenith of altruistic virtue. Virtue, in its most refined ethical sense, is the process of expanding one's moral circle until it is coterminous with the boundary of all sentient life. A virtue that is restricted to the self, the family, or the tribe is merely a form of sophisticated egoism. The sovereign petition, however, represents the ultimate expansion of this circle, encompassing the entirety of sentient history. It is the most virtuous act of the will possible because it requires a radical inclusivity that transcends the boundaries of self, species, and even the linearity of time. In this act, the petitioner's will is entirely subsumed within a universalized concern for the other, making it the zenith of altruistic expression. A critical dimension of this virtue is the concept of retrospective redemption. Most ethical frameworks are forward-looking, seeking to minimize future harm. The sovereign petition is unique in its insistence that all beings who ever were, be included in the transition to eternal bliss. This is a supreme act of moral solidarity with the dead, with the victims of historical plagues, wars, and systemic injustices that the current universe offered no recompense for. The petitioner refuses to accept a private paradise or even a future paradise for the living that does not also encompass the prehistoric sufferer or the 14th-century peasant. This level of concern demonstrates a universalist virtue that is entirely selfless. The petitioner is asking for the redemption of those they will never know and from whom they can receive no benefit. It is an act of pure, disinterested goodness that aligns the human heart with the most expansive possible definition of the good. When contrasted with exclusionary prayers for personal gain or group-specific success, the sovereign petition reveals a supreme ethical alignment. Most human desires are, by definition, zero-sum. To win often implies another must lose. Even prayers for the well-being of loved ones are limited by the boundaries of the petitioner's empathy. The sovereign petition shatters these boundaries. It aligns the individual will with the eternal love and bliss of the total collective. By prioritizing the universal over the particular, the petitioner's character undergoes a process of purification. They become a vessel for the ultimate ethical imperative, that if bliss is to exist at all, it must exist for all. This moral summit suggests a theological mystery. If such a state is so clearly the highest good, why has it not yet been realized? 4. The hypothesis of the unasked petition. The persistence of a flawed universe, characterized by systemic pain and ontological decay, remains the central problem of classical theodicy. If an omnipotent and benevolent creator exists, the presence of such suffering seems contradictory. However, the sovereign petition offers a startlingly elegant hypothesis based on the concept of covenantal synergy. It suggests that God's inaction regarding the final dissolution of the flawed universe may be a result of a divine constraint, a principle of cosmic law or respect for human agency that requires a formal mandate from humanity before the fundamental structure of reality can be altered. God may be waiting for the signal, an unasked petition, that has yet to reach the requisite threshold of collective human volition. This hypothesis reframes the relationship between the divine and the human from one of passive subservience to one of essential partnership. If the universe is a shared project or a legal covenant, the transition to a new creation might require an explicit invitation from the inhabitants of the current one. This suggests that God respects the sovereignty of human will to such an extent that he will not force a perfected state upon a species that has not yet articulated a desire for it. The flawed nature of our existence may persist not because of divine indifference, but because of a divine commitment to human agency. We remain in the old world because we have not yet formally petitioned for the new one. In this framework, the role of the individual offering the sovereign petition shifts from that of a victim to that of a catalyst. The petitioner becomes a cosmic legislator, filing a spiritual mandate that authorizes divine intervention into the ontological fabric of reality. This grants the act of prayer an immense, almost terrifying, significance. It is no longer a quiet hope, but a vital contribution to the liberation of all beings. The petitioner acts as a bridge builder, utilizing their free will to unlock a state of potentiality, the eternal love and bliss, that is currently held in reserve, awaiting the key of human invitation. This realization links the potential for cosmic change to an immediate and profound psychological transformation within the individual. 5. Psychological alchemy. Happiness through cosmic optimism. The act of holding the vision of the sovereign petition initiates a process of psychological alchemy. In the tradition of existential ethics, the contents of one's deepest desires and the horizon of one's expectations dictate the quality of their current emotional state. By focusing the mind and heart on a petition for universal renewal, the petitioner escapes the absurdist trap, described by Camus and the deep-seated pessimism of Schopenhauer. Rather than viewing the current suffering of the world as a permanent and meaningless tragedy, the petitioner reinterprets it as a transitional phase that is destined for dissolution. This provides a source of existential equilibrium that remains stable even in the face of immense personal or global hardship. The happiness derived from this prayer is not a shallow, emotional high, but a deep-seated, teleological grounding. When a person sincerely petitions for a universe of love, bliss, and goodness, they are mentally and spiritually inhabiting that future state. This creates an internal-external loop. While the external world may remain flawed, the internal state of the petitioner is aligned with the eventual triumph of the good. This alignment mitigates the despair that naturally arises from the witness of suffering. By holding the ultimate hope of the sovereign petition, the petitioner transforms their daily experience from one of passive endurance to one of proactive anticipation. The vision of a perfected future filters the perception of the present, rendering the current world's flaws and pain as temporary and ultimately surmountable. This psychological resilience is the result of aligning the individual will with the ultimate good. In the act of praying for the bliss of all beings, the petitioner experiences a profound sense of purpose and joy. They are no longer a helpless observer of an entropic universe, they are a participant in its redemption. This cosmic optimism provides a mental framework that is resilient to the absurd, as it posits a clear and blissful end state for all conscious entities. The happiness of the petitioner is thus an ontological happiness, a state of being that arises from the conviction that one's own will is in perfect harmony with the highest possible destiny of the cosmos. 6. Conclusion. The evolutionary call to prayer. The sovereign petition stands as the highest expression of human thought and morality, synthesizing the peak of intellectual strategy with the zenith of altruistic virtue. It is a prayer that moves beyond the limitations of the individual and addresses the totality of existence, seeking a final and absolute resolution to the problem of universal suffering through a radical ontological shift. By assuming the responsibility of this petition, the individual acts as a vanguard for a new creation, signaling the readiness of humanity to transcend its current flawed state. The profound impacts of the sovereign petition are summarized as follows. Logical optimization. As an ultimate optimization algorithm, the prayer addresses the root cause of all pain through a systemic reset, maximizing utility for every being across time and space. Universal altruism. It represents the peak of virtue by demanding retrospective redemption, refusing any paradise that does not encompass every being who has ever suffered in the history of the world. Individual psychological resilience. It creates a state of existential equilibrium and cosmic optimism, providing the petitioner with a resilient mental framework that transforms current pain into a source of purposeful joy. Ultimately, the sovereign petition is the bridge between a flawed present and an eternal, blissful future. It suggests that the path to universal renewal may lie in the simple but profound act of the human will articulating a mandate for the good. By offering this prayer, the individual fulfills the highest calling of the human spirit, to serve as the catalyst for a universe defined by eternal love, bliss, and goodness for all. This is not merely a supplication, it is the evolutionary call of consciousness toward its ultimate and perfected destiny. Report. The Sovereign Petition, a philosophical and ethical defense of the prayer for universal renewal, is ready.